appreciate you saying nice things. Just
Oh, I disagree. I think you've been great.
Yeah, me too.
Well, the good news is it's almost over. I got to
For
get through about 2
you.
minutes of this meeting and then I'm done.
Pass the torch.
I get to sit back and mute my mic and not say anything.
Okay, here we go. Looks like we're live on the YouTube. And let's double check to make sure that's.
Angie, do you want me to do public comment on items not listed on the agenda before I do the motion for alternates and election of officers? Who is the
That's
alternate?
fine.
Is Kate? Do we even have an alternate now?
Marcus Jacob.
Oh, Marcus.
Yeah. Marcus Swift. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
We do
Marcus
have an
Swift. Sorry.
Okay. We do have an alternate, although we will have a quorum, so it's entirely optional. I'm anticipating a quorum, but it's entirely optional as to whether or not you bring him into a voting position today.
Well, if he's here, I will. But if do you want me to do the public comment before all that, or do you want me to do the alternate in the election and then hand it over to Lynn and let her do that?
Let's do, if it's all right with you, let's do roll call, and then you can acknowledge him as a voting commissioner, and then we'll tip into public comment
on the script. Public comments before the motion for alternates in the election of officers.
Yeah, the bylaws just require us to hold elections at the first meeting of the year, and so we can do it at any point. I just had previously recommended we do it soon, at the beginning of the agenda before we got into the presentation, but it doesn't matter where in the beginning.
You do the public comment if there's people that wanted to talk before we did all that other stuff.
Yeah, that's fine with me. Definitely fine with me. Thank you.
Is it just the four of us? I figure my view out here.
Hey, Brad. Oh, you're on mute.
I said, good afternoon.
It's hard to sit inside when the
Chris.
weather's so pretty.
I know what you mean.
I was going to say, I appreciate you guys being here when it's so pretty outside. It's one of the first, I suppose, 10 days of really nice spring weather. I got to sneak out at lunch and it was wonderful. But it looks like you both have windows. I think I see the sheen of sunlight in your offices.
Yeah, I got one that looks out at 197 and the river and Water's Edge and the bridge. But it's a small one.
It's a porthole. Is it just going to be Brad and I today, Angie? I don't think that constitutes quorum.
We're expecting most of the others. Maybe they're all out playing in the sun. Just got a minute. There's one.
Sorry. I couldn't find my link to get in.
That's okay. We're waiting on a few others as well.
Is 4 a quorum?
Technically I think you need 5. Oh, no, you only need 4. 4 of the 7, right? We only have 7 voting. The 4 is
Oh,
the
there-
quorum, yes.
There's Marcus, so
There's
that's in good shape.
So Chair Shano, you're only waiting on Commissioner Russ Hargrave for those that I'm anticipating attending this evening. You do have a quorum.
Okay. Okay, so we'll call this, is everybody, Jenzy, are you ready to go with everything?
Yes, I just started the recording.
Okay. Okay, welcome Commissioner, staff, and public to the meeting. Thank you for your patience as we learn a new way of hosting public meetings in response to the governor's orders related to COVID-19. Oregon revised statutes 192.640 and 192.670 allow for public bodies to hold meetings via means of phone or electronic communication to ensure for public safety, but increase participation. Wasco County is elected to hold all public meetings for the near term via video conferencing. Staff has prepared a public participation guide that was emailed to all registered participants on how to use the Zoom software. It's also available for download or view on the Wasco County Planning Commission page. We are also live streaming this via YouTube and on the Wasco County website. Director Brewer, if you'd like to call roll.
Thank you, Chair. Vicki Ashley? Absent today. Russell Hargrave? I see you. Bradley DeHart? I see a thumbs up. Everybody's on mute. Commissioner Lynn McIntyre? Commissioner Mike Davis is absent today. Commissioner Kate Willis?
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Chris Shano?
I'm here.
Thank you. And Commissioner Marcus Swift?
Here.
And Commissioner Leroy Booth, I'll just briefly share with you all that he has relocated out of the area, out of Wasco County, and has, as a result, resigned his position. So he's not here today, and we can talk more about that during the director's report at the end of the meeting. So I'll turn that back over to you, Cristiano. As far as staff goes, I'm Angie Brewer, I'm planning director. Kelly and Jency and anybody else on the line that is staff, feel free to introduce yourself.
Kelly Housley Glover, a long-range special projects planner.
Jency Smith, planning coordinator.
Daniel Doherty, associate planner.
I think that's it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, my name wasn't called, but I am here. Lynn McIntyre.
I did hear her call you, Lynn. I don't know. I didn't hear you
Oh.
answer, but she did call you.
I must.
Okay. And you have her down, Ann? Okay.
And excuse me, Chris, I was on mute when I answered, so might not have heard it.
Commissioner Hargraves is here too, Director Brewer. All right, that's a good sign. Okay, so this meeting is being recorded and will be publicly available. All participants must mute themselves unless they are speaking. Lines providing feedback while not speaking will be muted to ensure others can hear. Only you can unmute yourself using the mic icon. If you are participating by phone, unmute yourself by dialing *6. Participants behaving inappropriately will be promptly removed from the meeting. The chair will specifically invite participants for public comment at the appropriate times, so please be patient and wait to be called on. Please refrain from using the comment feature unless directed by the chair. It will distract from the intended flow of the hearing's procedure. At this time, we'd like to do public comments on any items not listed on the agenda. Is there any members of the public that would like to share comments that are not listed on the agenda at this time? I'm not hearing anything. *6 if you need to unmute, or press the little button in the, I believe, lower left-hand corner. Okay, and we'll move on. So at the first meeting for the bylaws of the year, we are supposed to elect officers. Oh, actually, first I'd like to recognize the alternate Swift to be a voting member for this meeting because we're down a couple people. So we'll need a motion to recognize him as a voting member today. Commissioner Swift.
This is Commissioner Willis. I'll motion to recognize Commissioner Swift for today's meeting.
Lynn
Okay,
McIntyre.
I'll second. Sorry, Lynn, go ahead.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a second motion. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, Marcus is voting today. And now we can, as per the bylaws, we can move on to the election of officers for 2021. This will be my last meeting as chairman for this year, darn it. And we need to elect somebody to take over. Lynn has been the vice, and we can entertain any motions for chair that you would like, but I would like to move to elect Lynn as the chairman or the chairperson, sorry, for the committee. And anybody else can make any motions, seconds or firsts that they feel that they want at this time.
I'd like to second that. This is Kate Willis.
Okay, we have,
Yeah, Chris, I had a question for Lynn. Do you want to be chair?
I'm fully prepared to be chair. Yes.
Okay, okay. Well, I think Lynn's been with us long enough to have a good understanding and brings a lot of obvious focus and attention to detail. So I think she'd be great at this job.
Thank you, Russ.
I would
Agreed.
second those comments.
And I would third wholeheartedly.
well, unless Brad has something that he wants to throw out there I'd say let's make a vote on this deal. So we have a first and second for Commissioner McIntyre being chairperson. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, it passes. Lynn will take over as the chair. At this point, Lynn or Commissioner McIntyre, please feel free to take over and I will sit back and mute my mic.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
you.
everybody's support and kind words. At this point, we need to nominate our vice chair of the Planning Commission. I would like to move that Kate Willis be vice chair of the Planning Commission.
I'd second that.
Any discussion?
This is Kate. I'm just wondering if there is anyone else who would, I know you'll run with this, Lynn, but I have a lot on my plate. I am very willing to do it, but if somebody would like to do it, then I just want to make sure that we're opening that up.
Brad, you're on mute.
Okay.
Not a good time for me, Russ or Lynn.
No, that's
I have a lot-
understandable.
I have a lot on my plate as well. So I appreciate Kate's comments but I'm not interested. Thank you.
And Russ, what's it look like for you?
Oh, I'm, sort of equally busy every day. I've got 2 teenage kids, and you can imagine. But
Yes, I can.
I first of all, if you feel that you have the capacity to take this on, Kate, I would strongly endorse your taking this position, just so that we do succeed in rotating the leadership,
Sure.
and getting all of the strong voices heard. So I think that in itself is a good thing, and you bring a lot of skills to bear. I would be willing to do it. I have the capacity. I could do it if, for example, you didn't feel that you could take it on. But I'm quite happy to see the leadership rotate, and I think that's really healthy for the Planning Commission.
Okay, great. Would it be possible to do we need to decide this today? And can I, Lynn, can I have a little bit of time to think about it? I would like to say yes, but could I have some time to think about this and arrange my life?
Angie, help me out with that matter.
So I can read the bylaws to you, but I do think there's flexibility if the commission would like to postpone this particular piece until the next meeting. I think that would probably be fine. But the bylaws state that the commission shall, at or before its first meeting in each year, elect or install one of its members to serve as chairperson and another to serve as vice chairperson. Nominations for chairperson and vice chairperson shall be by oral motion duly made and seconded, placing a name for commission consideration. That's about it for the voting aspect. So I mean, you've elected a chair, you've nominated and succeeded in the chairperson position. I think it's probably sufficient to have started this conversation at this first meeting and can carry it forward. But I defer to you all as to whether or not you're comfortable with that.
It says nominate and install chair and vice chair.
Let's
You know-
proceed. Let's go ahead and proceed. That's fine.
I was going to point out, Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think according to the rules, it's fine if we change the vice chair at the next meeting. That's part of the normal process. And so, Kate, what we might do here is go ahead and fulfill the bylaws, but consider it to be, but understand that you're still going through a review process. And so it's possible at the next meeting that we may make a change, and that's well within the bylaws. So if, maybe that's a way to proceed.
Sounds
That would be
reasonable.
fine.
Okay. All right. So we have a first and a second on the motion. Any further discussion? All in favor of Kate Willis as vice chair, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion carried. Kate is now the vice chair until further notice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. All right, let's move on to the approval of the minutes from November 3rd, 2020. Does anyone have any additions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, could I have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting, from the November meeting.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
I wasn't there, so I can't vote on them.
Yes,
Kate, I
I'll
think you were
second.
there.
Yes, Kate Willis will second.
Okay. All in favor of approval of the minutes of November 3rd, 2020, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. Thank you. We'll move on now to open the hearing for the purpose of the Planning Commission's consideration of land use application file 921-20-000-167, a post-acknowledgement plan amendment to revise the Wasco County Land Use and Development Ordinance. Tonight will be reserved for a staff presentation, followed by public comment and Planning Commission discussion. The procedure I'd like to follow, first the staff will present their report, and then we'll provide an opportunity for the public to provide comment, and then the Planning Commission will have discussion. Commissioners may also ask questions after the staff report. The hearing is scheduled for 2 hours. We will try to conclude the hearing by 5. Anyone that is providing testimony is limited to 3 minutes, and staff will time the comment period and mute when the 3 minutes have lapsed. Rules of evidence are as follows. No person shall present irrelevant, immaterial, or unduly repetitious testimony or evidence. If you have submitted written comments, please do not restate it in oral testimony unless you have further information to add. Evidence received shall be of a quality that reasonable persons rely upon in the conduct of their daily affairs. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the criteria applicable to the hearing. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes further appeal based on that issue. Disclosure of interest of ex parte contact. Does any commission member wish to disqualify themselves for any personal or financial interest in the matter tonight? Okay. Hearing none. Does any commission member wish to report any significant ex parte or pre-hearing contacts? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the right of any commission member to hear this matter? Is there any member of the audience who wishes to question the jurisdiction of this body to act on behalf of Wasco County in this matter? Okay, at this time, we need to everybody make sure they mute the presentation. Kelly is going to give us our presentation. Kelly, are you
Chair?
ready?
Thank you, Chair. I had to find my mute button. Thank you, Chair and Commission. Before I begin my presentation, I just wanted to give you guys an update, close the chapter on Wasco County 2040. We found out in March from the Department of Land Conservation and Development that they had approved our last work task and that we have officially resolved periodic review. And it's hugely exciting. We're just so thrilled by the process and the results. And our partners are as well. So they have invited us to actually give a presentation in May, very short, short and sweet, but to the Land Conservation and Development Commission. So we're going to be using that time in May. I think it's the 27th or the 20th of May, to mostly give a lot of thanks to the Department of Land Conservation and Development and other partners like ODF&W, but also give them some lessons on what we learned out of this process and the work that we've done that we promised we would do in really helping our counterparts in other jurisdictions successfully navigate updating their comprehensive plan. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be information available on the website when we'll be on the docket for the LCDC presentation, but we're so thrilled to have passed that final hurdle. So tonight, those of you who have been on the commission for several years will remember back in 2016 when we were scoping all of these long-range projects, we had an in-depth discussion about whether we did the comp plan first or the land use and development ordinance update first. And of course, it made a lot of sense to do the comp plan first because that's the 20-year vision, that's the policies, those are the implementation items. We really wanted to get that community vision of what we want to see happen in Wasco County in terms of land use and development from the community. So that really bottom-up approach to understanding land use planning. So this next phase with the land use and development ordinance is really the rulemaking that comes out of that comprehensive plan policy. So tonight, I want to talk really broadly about the scope of this 2-year project, the kinds of things that we're going to tackle with a special focus on this year's agenda, and then give you a little bit more in depth about the work tasks for this year, talk about the process, including the public participation elements, and then conclude my presentation, allow for questions. My assistant, Isaac Statz, may come available, and he's got a very short 5-minute presentation to talk about some resources that we pulled together for the Planning Commission that were requested the last time we met about long-range issues. So if he's not able to make it, I can jump in and kind of give you guys some clues about what that looks like. And we have an action item for you guys. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about our scope. So like I said, today I really want to focus on this year's scope, but I want to talk through at a high level the next 2 years and what that looks like, because I think it's really important for understanding the strategy behind this project. So what we did will feel very familiar. It should feel familiar to the commission. It should also feel familiar to members of the public. in how we designed this process. Really trying to pick the things that worked really well for us during the comp plan update, and then tweak those things that were maybe a little bit problematic. And one of the things that we found worked really well was starting with the sort of easier, non-optional housekeeping types of updates. So we started with that in our first year of the comp plan update, stuff that wasn't controversial, that really just a lot of housekeeping business. And we thought that gave us, maximized the amount of time that people were aware of this update, gave them a lot of time to participate. And then of course we have the added complication of having COVID restrictions still, with not really a clear end in sight of when we're going to be able to be allowed to meet in public. So we wanted to do things that we thought we could still do pretty successfully remotely and still get a lot of public input. So we've built out a interactive on the website timeline, and we have two timelines. We have a process timeline that talks about what this actual process looks like, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But the first major timeline that anybody would see on the website, and I've got here on the slide, is it's interactive, and it shows basically what the impetus behind each work task is. So what's driving this update? And we have three main buckets of drivers that we're really focused on. One are those required updates. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about why they're required and what that means. But we've also taken the pain of color coding these. So the color coding means the main driver behind it. So brown symbolizes things that were required by state or federal law to do, that we want to make sure our code is up to par. So it makes a seamless experience for both planners and the public, so they can read our code and know with confidence that's exactly what it says in state law. The items in yellow that we've got up here, the review procedures and the land divisions chapters, these are procedurally heavy chapters in our land use and development ordinance. So they don't tell us what we can do in zones, or they don't give us a criteria. They really walk us through the process. So for instance, when we're getting ready for the hearing and we read that script about the flow of hearing, or we talk about notices, that all lives in the procedural chapter of chapter 2. And then land divisions really talks about how the process by which we partition or subdivision. And those things are yellow because they were identified either by staff or past staff or other partners. In land division case, it was surveyors who really have flagged this 10 years ago as problematic and needed an update. But as you can see from the chart, they're also, most of these components are required by law too. So we're kind of doing double duty there. And then finally, those items that are highlighted in green are things that came out of Wasco County 2040. So specifically, you'll remember several years ago, we had a pretty big conversation with the public about agritourism, because new rules got passed at the state legislature in 2012 to allow for agritourism in the exclusive farm use zone. And we wanted to know how Wasco County felt about it. Well, it was sort of unanimous. The consensus was we want to do everything we can to empower farmers in this county. And we just want to add all those provisions in. So it's really, that's a pretty simple work task, but we want to make sure to highlight it because we think it's really exciting and really important work that came out of Wasco County 2040. And then the last one is the overlay zones, or what we're currently calling environmental protection districts. The first thing we want to do is clean up that nomenclature so that it's really clear. These are actually overlay zones. They're not all environmental. And then we have some tweaks. We need to clean up the language so it's much more consistent section to section. We also have some things that came out of Wasco County 2040, like you'll remember a lot of discussions around the natural areas, wild and scenic rivers, scenic waterways, where we had to go through that ESEE analysis and determine how we permit these things. So those kinds of things, again, mostly required. So really what we're trying to tackle this year is a lot of the required stuff. It's a lot of the housekeeping stuff. There are some optional updates I'm going to talk a little bit about a little bit later on with some of the legislative updates and the model code updates. But by and large, this is kind of the housekeeping year. It's not the super exciting year, but we want people to participate so they get comfortable with what the experience looks like. So next year we have a full agenda, and it's a lot of really exciting optional stuff. We also have some housekeeping pieces. So we have some natural hazard work that's happening behind the scenes by partners, where we think we're going to have to update those natural hazard overlay zones or environmental protection districts. There's also a lot of movement in the commercial energy facility space at the legislative level. So we are anticipating that continuing to roll. We already know of a few changes to how we treat solar power, for instance, that we're going to have to deal with. Not super urgent, because we just approved 3 additional facilities. Haven't heard any murmurs of any more, but it's still something we want to clean up and make sure we're consistent. One of the things that was flagged during Wasco County 2040, but staff was also aware of, is that we really need a separate communications facilities chapter. So that's dealing with mobile towers, phones, that kind of thing. And that's going to be even more important as we start to see 5G filter into the rural areas. So that's something we've got to do, required by law, but also recommended, and also something we heard during Wasco County 2040. Simultaneously, concurrently, right now, we're working on the community wildfire protection plan. So that's corresponds directly to Chapter 10 in the Land Use and Development Ordinance, fire safety standards. And so we're going to have some recommendations that come out of those conversations with fire chiefs and other wildfire experts, that we're going to want to make sure those rules in Chapter 10 are consistent. So we're planning on updating that chapter. And then our 3 green superstars are things that we think the public's going to get really excited about. We've got the housing pieces. So we're going to see this year if the accessory dwelling unit bill finally goes through the legislature and allows those widespread and rural residential. And if that's the case, we need to think about any potential restrictions on that. Do we want to limit the size? Do we want to limit whether or not it needs to be on the same septic? So those kinds of things we need to talk about. Same thing with short-term rentals. We don't currently have a way to permit those. So we need to think about, do we want to see short-term rentals? And then how do we deal with it? And then finally, you'll remember just last year, we passed that destination resort eligibility map. So we have 2 sites in Wasco County that would be eligible for destination resort. Now we get to do the tough work of building criteria to potentially approve an application. And that's going to be a lot of work, because we know people are worried about water. We know people are worried about fire. We have to come up with clear and objective standards to really be able to vet that out. So those things are on the docket for next year. I want to make it clear that for members of the public who are listening, we are open for business on any of these topics. If you have information you want to share right now about short-term rentals, about housing, about destination resorts, send us comments now, ask us questions now. We haven't done all the analysis, but we certainly want to hear from the public on all these issues frequently and as much as possible. Okay, so I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of the work tasks for this year. I want to stress that these things, they're numbered, not necessarily in the way we're going to deal with them, but numbered, and they're not numbered in importance. It's just the way they came out on the work plan. So the first task is to deal with the environmental protection districts, or the overlay zones. And as I mentioned, our first priority is to change that name so that we can, it makes much more sense to everybody, including planners, that these all aren't environmental protection districts. Some of them are actually just overlay zones. So what I mean when I say that is we have several limited use zones, like something for the Washington Family Ranch, or we have a couple campsites. Camp Morrow is a good example in Wasco County. We're not protecting necessarily the environment, but what those overlay zones do is restrict some of the uses, and that's appropriate based on what state law allows. So we're going to change that nomenclature to make a lot more sense to us in the public, and then potentially tweak some of the individual names for those zones, and just to make it more intuitive, make more sense to everybody, so it's very clear all the time what these things are. And then, as I mentioned, we've got some things that came out of Wasco County 2040. So EPD4 is our cultural, historic, and archaeological overlay zone. We added 2 sites that were on the National Historic Register, but we also have had some changes to the way we deal with state historic preservation. That we just need to make sure that that zone is up to par with what's required by state law. 5 is our mineral and aggregate zones. We had to switch over in the comp plan from division 16 to 23. This is referencing the Oregon administrative rules. We need to go through that language, make sure it's consistent with division 23. Nothing revolutionary. It's a lot of housekeeping, but it should be interesting. 7's that one where right now we're treating any CUP, any conditional use in the underlying zone, it's prohibited outright. We went through that analysis to say, no, that's not really appropriate. What we'd rather see is just treating everything that's right next to the rivers or next to any of these natural areas as conditional use permits. So we're allowing more permissions. And then also some of the language is really confusing. I think members of the public in the past haven't understood that federal wildland scenic rivers and Oregon scenic waterways are actually a Goal 5 protected resource. So it's not optional. It's something that we're required by law to do. So we want to make sure, again, that language says it in black and white, makes it really clear to the public. And then 12, we did update the map last year. That's sensitive bird sites. Again, we just want to comb through that language, make sure it's consistent. And any updates that we have for the adoption. So work task 2 is for legislative updates and model code updates. And these are 2 separate things that sort of pair well together. They play good in the sandbox. Legislative updates are any kinds of land use bills, modifications to the Oregon revised statutes that happen at the legislative level at the Oregon Congress. And we've had a lot of these happen since we last did a holistic update of our code, which was 2012. So we've made some minor tweaks with marijuana is a good example, but we didn't touch other parts of the code. And so we have a list of things outstanding. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, there are some optional items in there. So we will be able to have a little bit of discussion, particularly the one that pops in my mind immediately is cideries. Legislatures now allowed for us to permit cideries like wineries. We already see this activity in Wasco County, so of course we want to adopt it, but it is optional, so we're interested in public comment about that. There's some other things that impact exclusive farm use zones, some things with, I think, farm breweries and the size of production facilities, things that we'll want people to take a look at because, again, they're mays, not shells, but we're going to throw it all in their draft, flag them very clearly as optional, and then that's the stuff we really want feedback on. The things that are required by law, they're not going to be as highlighted. There will probably be a sort of key that public can follow to see when the law was passed and what that means. But generally, if it's required, we don't have a lot of options. And then I've talked a lot about the farm uses. It's important to state that the legislative updates also impact our forest zones. So our F1 and our F2, we will see some movement in those chapters. It's a lot of chapters that we have to update. So model code, if you remember, I've got a legislative summary here. I'm going to go over model code first. Model code, if you remember, we got a grant from the DLCD in 2016. They had prepared for our resource zones, farm and forest zones, a model code that could be used by counties. And then we're awarding grants for an external organization, so the Angelo Planning Group, to audit codes to see where we were in and out of compliance. We received a grant in 2016. They did that work for us. They also did some special work at looking definitions we needed to add based on some of the updates. So really what's going to come out of that is a lot of definitions, a lot of new definitions, and then some changes to some of the permissions. In most cases, things are moving from a conditional use permit level to a type 2. So it's a slightly less robust analysis. And I think generally it's going to be good for our citizens. It's less cost. It's sort of a less intensive process. but it still has a lot of those checks and balances. So I think people are going to be generally really supportive of what we see comes out of that. And again, these things are required. They're not optional. When they're optional, we will clearly flag that they're optional. And that's the stuff we really want to hone public feedback on. So I've got a list here of some of the legislative stuff just to give a better idea than off the top of my head of what's mandatory coming out of legislative updates and what's optional. So one big one for us, we've been trying to administer it directly from statute, but it took us a little while to figure it out. Agricultural buildings now acceptable, permittable in forest zones, which is great. We now have some changes to how much long we have to respond to a LUBA appeal. We've got some restrictions on how we can treat property line adjustments in resource zones. So basically, we can't use the property line adjustment system to create buildable lots, which will be, a departure from the way things have been done in the past. And then one thing that we've seen a lot of shifting sands on is the replacement dwellings. And yet again, we've got some legislative updates. Specifically, we're not allowed to use tax classification as a analysis point in understanding whether a building's replaceable or not. The optional stuff, cideries I already talked about. We do currently have a provision to permit accessory dwelling units in rural residential zones where there is a historic home clearly defined as houses that existed prior to, I believe, 1945. We can permit those right now through statute, but it's optional. So we still want to make sure the public, we check in again and say, hey, you said ADUs, you wanted to go for it. Let's make sure, and then have any additional criteria we want to add at the top. Also optional guest ranches on 160 acres or more, allowing equine therapeutic and counseling activities. So that's a lot of, we've seen a lot of this mostly in the scenic area in Wasco County, but we've heard murmurs in neighboring counties where people are wanting to do the horse therapy activity. So this is just a new use that we'd be able to permit out there on the landscape to help our farmers make money. Farm breweries, I mentioned. This is probably a non-starter for Wasco County because we are not a hop growing county. But if somebody wanted to grow hops, we would be able to permit a brewery on site, just like a winery. And then one thing that we definitely want to talk to folks about is we now have the ability to permit poultry slaughtering and processing in EFU. But people generally in other jurisdictions have a lot of mixed feelings about that. So we want to make sure we get public input on that. Okay, so the two things we're tackling first this month that we've got a lot of outreach activities around, and we're going to have drafts up within next week, are the procedural chapters. So as I mentioned, these are things that either past staff or partners flagged as needing some serious work. And so we did some serious work. We've been working on these behind the scenes since 2019. For chapter 2, which is the procedural chapter, it talks about the review process, the notification process, the hearings process, a lot of process. We got together as a team with the current plan, long range and current planning, and painstakingly went over this chapter, looking at other counties and the way they did it, looking at the state law, so the revised statutes and the administrative rules, and also looking at case law to see where we were landing and how we could really streamline this. The end result was that this chapter needed a major overhaul, really a reorganization of material to make it make a lot more sense to the public and to ourselves. So this is one of the few chapters where you're not going to see annotations. You're not going to see what's optional and what's not. You're just going to have to do a side comparison. And I apologize for that and it's just because the sheer volume of reorganizing we did. But I can say, vetted with our staff, then it went through the process of a review by a special consulting land use attorney who deals exclusively with these kinds of issues. He said, procedural issues are the majority of the work he does. So he's really a state expert on this topic. And he let us know where we were right on with state law and what potential vulnerabilities were. So we could kind of clean that up before we presented it to you. So we're feeling very confident. This is a very solid draft. We've got a new chart in there to really help the readability. We're hoping everybody's going to feel great about this chapter. I will say most of it is mandatory and most of it's really for efficiency. So I don't think anything revolutionary in this chapter. It's lockstep with state law, but worth a perusal if you're interested in how we do and why we do the things we do. Because I know sometimes it can seem a little mysterious. So this is just an example of we took this very long index and pared it down substantially. This isn't the final index, but it just gives you an example of how we were able to seriously manipulate this chapter to make it a lot more clear. So the next procedural chapter is also part of this April hard push, is the land divisions chapter. Again, this is a procedural chapter. It's not talking about what uses are allowed or what things are allowed. It's talking about how we divide land. Most of this is determined by state law. So we're looking in the Oregon Revised Statutes 92, also 197 and 215, where we get a lot of direction. There are also some statutes in there applied to the surveyors when they're making plats and dealing with subdivisions. And so that's why we worked really intimately with them. So again, we as staff took this very seriously. We did that internal work group, same process as chapter 2, to really come up with the best possible draft. The next step was I pulled together a technical advisory group of 6 surveyors. So the past county surveyor who really identified this chapter as problematic, the current county surveyor, and then 3 other surveyors from the area that are very familiar with our code, very familiar with our process, and have their own pain points. And we had a review and a discussion, and really made, I think, some great progress. The next step, I should add in, one of the things that came out of that was we wanted to pull the road standards out of this chapter and give them their standalone chapter. So we're proposing to create a road standards chapter, chapter 22. It's a new chapter. Just pulling those 2 pieces apart. And that was actually reviewed by the Public Works Director, Arthur Smith, who's sort of the head of roads in Wasco County. So not a lot of changes there, mostly just pulling it apart and making a couple tweaks based on the status quo. So some of the processes have changed, like who does signage, for example, in Wasco County, making sure that was current. The final step with chapter 21, again, was to have that legal expert, our consulting land use attorney, review this material. And land divisions is another thing he deals with very frequently. We actually saw him give a presentation at a planning workshop, so we know he knows his stuff. And he did a fantastic job at really guiding us at what we needed to look for, with some court cases that have come down the pike over the last 3 to 4 years. So we're, again, taking a chapter that has been, I think, a pain point for particularly some of our partners, and really, we think, offering a gold standard approach to land divisions. Most of these changes are, again, mandatory, and they're for efficiency, not too much. There are 1 or 2 optional things in there that we'd love the public's eyeballs on, and we'd love the public feedback on. But generally, this is a cleanup. It's just really trying to make this chapter easier to read and much more efficient and effective for everybody. So here's some examples of the kinds of cleanup we're doing in this chapter. We use lots of different terminology all of this chapter, and everybody said, no, we need to pick one and stick with it. So we picked one and stuck with it. Like I mentioned, cleaning up some of the old internal processes and making them more accurate to the way we do things. We had a lot of direction for surveyors in there, which was unnecessary. They don't necessarily read that part of our code for directions. They go straight to state law. So we're just putting in that reference and letting them be. And then I mentioned the creating chapter 22. So agritourism, as I mentioned before, that came out of a really robust conversation. We heard when we first talked to the public in 2017, one of the things we heard loud and clear was we need help out here on our farm landscape thinking of anything and everything we can do as a county to make farms more sustainable and to make them more profitable. And agritourism is one of those things that we know we see happening in other jurisdictions. We know is a possibility here in Wasco County. And so when we had the discussion, we just wanted to see how the public felt about this option. And I think generally it was wildly embraced, and folks didn't want us to add any special restrictions. They said, let's just roll the dice and see how it goes. So that's what we're doing. We're pulling it straight from state law and putting it straight into our exclusive farm use chapter. So again, even though this is an optional provision, this was a direction from the community. We're happy to hear any additional public feedback about that, and we can have a public conversation. But the direction as it stands right now is just to pull it directly from state law, put it into the EFU chapter, and away we go. Hopefully seeing lots of fun agritourism activities pop up on the landscape in the next several years. Okay, so that does it for the work tasks for this year. As you can see, most of them mandatory, a few optional items we want people to pay attention to, but hopefully it's a good way to get familiar with the process, really feel comfortable with what we're doing, and get plugged in at this really early stage. I've got two process charts here. They look pretty similar. One of the things I want to highlight, because the volume of material that we have to present, that we have to collect, that we have to send off the state is so high. One of the things that we heard from the public, especially last year, was, gosh, just make this a little easier to get into. So what we did was created icons to correspond with all those work tasks. And we tried to make them, again, color coded so you could see what was driving them, but also the actual symbology, the iconography, intuitive. So you'll see that repeated on the website, repeated in these charts. And then we're also going to stick them on all the drafts and all the staff reports and all the things that come out, so people know which staff report, which document corresponds to which work tasks. Hopefully makes it very clear so people can jump in and out where they're interested, because some people may be really interested in communication facilities, but have nothing to say about agritourism. And so we want them to be able to pick and choose and not feel like they're missing out. So we've been able to use that iconography in our process. And I want to talk a little bit about the process here. So we have 3 phases for each year. The first phase is our research phase. It's a little misleading on the charts because it kind of just says we're researching for 3 months. But as you've heard me talk over the last little bit, you've heard me say some of the stuff we've been working at behind the scenes for years. So, and we've been collecting staff feedback on some of these chapters and public feedback on these chapters for multiple years, really since I came on board. So it can be a little misleading to say we're only doing 3 months of research, but that's really the concentrated research when we're really starting to revise the drafts, prepare things for public consumption, start building that infrastructure for public outreach. But just it's important to be aware that a lot of these things do take a lot of time, and we've been working on them behind the scenes. The next biggest phase, the most amount of time we're spending for this process, is the public input phase. And that people probably picked up on during Wasco County 2040, that it's important for me, definitely important for Director Brewer, definitely important, I know, to this Planning Commission and also to our Board of County Commissioners, that we have a lot of citizen involvement, that we exceed the standards of what our cohort is doing elsewhere in the state, and that we really try to do the best we can to hear from as many people as we can about things that we know impact people's lives. So we're spending a lot of time on that public input piece. Even when some of these pieces, like I said, are mandatory, we still want to hear public feedback. We still want to hear from folks. And because we have these COVID constraints, we have a really exciting, I think, program of ways for people to plug in and even do stuff on demand, which takes us away from that typical, you got to show up here for 3 hours and hang out with us. And you can really do it on your own time, which I think I'm hoping really increases that participation, increases people's level of comfort with our activities, and really increases the quality of participation. Then finally, we have to go through the legislative, the actual rulemaking phase, which is the hearings phase. And let me pull up this chart here because you'll see these month chapters. So those kick off in September. We have, because of the sheer volume of stuff, we have tentatively scheduled 2 planning commission hearings in September. We're separating some of the work tasks. And then once we have a recommendation from the planning commission, then we'll be marching on to the Board of County Commissioners. And we've tentatively scheduled meetings with them for October and November with a goal of having it sent off to the state by the end of November and then getting approval December, January. So we have a newer version of the Ludo to operate from. And then, of course, we're going to tweak it the following year. So what does the research phase entail? I think it helps demystify a little bit what our process looks like. So a lot of what we do is looking at best practices, doing comparative studies with other counties, and that may be other counties in other jurisdictions. For some of these issues that I'm looking at for next year, I'm actually looking internationally at best practices. So we really try to do a comparative study and also read peer-reviewed research. So we look at journal articles, see what the academics and other practitioners are saying. For a lot of the more mandatory things, the things that are required, we have to do a lot of statute and rule review, and that it can be a little cumbersome because it's a lot to review and it changes. So that's a big part of our research. And then also, I've mentioned a couple of times, case law is pretty important. So that's when land use cases go through the appeals process and the court makes a decision that's not necessarily intuitive based on the state rule. So we have to make sure we're keeping that in mind when we're writing rules to really understand what's legally defensible as far as our code and what potentially could result in a procedural error. And that's really important for myself and Director Brewer to make sure that as good stewards of taxpayer dollars that we're making this code as tight and as defensible as possible. Also, what we do in this research phase I mentioned is preparing all that outreach. So putting together all the infrastructure and the materials to really get the public involved. And that is not a small feat, but we hope the public's going to be really thrilled with some of the work that we've produced for this project. The public outreach phase, as I mentioned, this year, we're having to focus a lot on the internet just because of COVID restrictions, and we're still not all vaccinated in this county, and we want to make sure we're protecting folks. So our first activity, it launches on Monday, is going to be a virtual open house. And we took a page out of what school districts nationally are doing to put a landing page together on our converted project website. So we're still using Wasco 2040. So it should be very familiar for everybody. Hopefully you've bookmarked it. And you're going to be able to toggle through some different steps to learn for next week about chapter 2 and chapter 21. So if you want to dive down into those procedural chapters and really kind of pull it apart and see what we're doing, that's a great place to start. And it's on demand. We're going to keep it up throughout the next several months. So if you can't get to it next week and you can't get to it in 2 weeks, maybe have some time in May to check it out, or maybe in June. And you'll have lots of time to share it too with your friends and your loved ones and your neighbors. So we're really excited. My assistant Isaac Stats has put together a phenomenal series of explainer videos. We did that a little bit with the comp plan, but we've gone full bore. So if you don't like to read a lot, you can watch a quick little video. It does have a little bit of text, but it's got some jazzy tunes and some cute cartoons. So we hope that helps be a little bit of entertaining, because we know land use planning can be a little dry. We're also, one of the things that we got asked a lot was, boy, golly, you guys are really loquacious. Like, it's a lot of reading material. How do you expect me to get through it? Can you please summarize this into one sheet? So we really took that to heart. We've prepared one sheet. They're probably going to be 2 sheets in most cases, because we're going to have a key to the updates on the back. So you can kind of read along the draft and then check out the back for kind of footnotes. But the front page of the one sheet is going to summarize the critical who, what, when, where, why. So you can see at a really quick glance, like 5-minute glance, what we're doing, what's going on. And we hope that really helped. Again, using those icons so you know exactly what we're talking about. We hope it's going to make it visually interesting, but also a quick way to understand what these updates are about. We're going to have surveys. We've got a public presentation scheduled for next week, and that's similar to what we would do on the road show. So the road show, we would take our dog and pony show, we would give a presentation and then separate into smaller, large groups for discussion. We're doing a similar model of that. We're going to give a presentation over chapter 2 and chapter 21, talk about what the updates are, and then open it up for a Q&A session with the public. One thing we're really excited about that Isaac is taking charge of is the Ask a Planner events. These are modeled after Ask Me Anything events. If you're a Reddit follower, we're going to be doing it on Facebook Live. So we have a lot of Facebook users in Wasco County. A lot of people rely on that for news and information. So we're trying to meet folks where they are because we can't physically meet folks where they are. And it's an opportunity for folks to show up and ask questions. And we really want to see people send us questions now. So we have a button on the website, wasco2040.com, where you can ask a planner a question. And we're going to have a staple of things ready to go, and then also be taking questions in at that point in time and answering them. We hope that, again, really demystifies the process and what we're doing, and gives folks an opportunity to understand how this rulemaking impacts them. Surveys, polls, got lots of polls back up on the website. So come take our polls. They're really quick. Usually it takes just a minute or two, and it's a great way to give feedback. Finally, we know and we recognize that not everybody has good access to internet in our county or has the mechanisms to get internet access. So we are having our facilities group at Wasco County put together an outdoor kiosk, sort of like you'd see at a trailhead, that will be outside the planning department office down there on 2nd Street. So near the Les Schwab, that you can just come down, pull into the parking lot, interact with this, old school paper maps, and fill out a comment card and leave that for us. And we hope that really helps to bridge the gap. Other things that people can do, they can still email, they can still submit a comment on the website, they can still, leave us a voicemail, and one of us can try to get back to them. That's a little bit more patchy because we're not all in the office, but we can schedule appointments to meet with people. We really, again, want to stress, even though we're not physically open for business at the office, we are very much open for business virtually. So other kinds of input outside of public input, one of the things that the public really wanted to stress during Wasco County 2040 to us staff, and we completely agree, we embrace this, is planners, you aren't always the experts at everything, even though you maybe like to think you are. So make sure you're checking in with the actual experts. Make sure you're getting those advisors, those subject experts to weigh in on this stuff. So we're, as I said, with chapter 21, we've already sought out the surveyor population who's intimately impacted by those rules to get their feedback. And we will continue that throughout this process to loop in those partners, to loop in those experts, to make sure, again, this code is the best it can be. I talked a lot about the legal review. That's been enormously helpful, and that is a resource that we do have available. Staff review. So what I do is really different from the current planners. The current planners, this is sort of their bread and butter. This is the thing that they interact with every day. They implement, they engage with the public on inquiries and permits. And so we're really making sure that they have opportunities to give us a lot of feedback. As I've mentioned, we've been collecting feedback about this Ludo for over 5 years. But they're still getting the opportunity to interact with the drafts and give us a lot of feedback. And we're really excited about, and I think they're really excited to see these updates. And then finally, I mentioned people can always send us a comment through the website. They can email me or email Isaac. And I also love to get letters in the mail. So if you really want to you want to support USPS and put a stamp on something and send me a nice handwritten note. That works great too. We also have comment cards available if you'd like me to ship some that you can have at your place of business. That works great too. They're on little postcards, so easy to kind of scratch off a few lines. But I want to encourage, even though, again, most of what we're doing this year is mandatory, I still really want to hear from the public. And if you're not excited about what we've got on deck this year, you're more excited about next year, send us a comment while you're thinking about it. Send us a comment, while it's on your mind, because it could help shape that research and that work we do for those tasks. I talked a little bit about the legislative process. So that's the actual planning commission hearings that we have to go through. I mentioned it's split between 2 dates in September. So unfortunately, a lot of work for the planning commission to attend those. And I know a lot of work for the public too. But it's the best we can do to try to get all these updates done in a cohesive manner. I wanted to make sure to stress, though, that we're talking about a lot of chapters. We're talking about, and compared to Wasco County 2040, the comp plan, with the exception of the Goal 5 that had a huge appendix, these chapters, by and large, are a lot bigger. They're 30 pages, they're 40 pages, they're 50 pages. And we're talking about multiple chapters that we have to update every year, 5 to 10 to maybe even 15 and 20. On top of that, we have to submit, we're required to the state to submit things like meeting minutes, to submit staff reports. So I want to prepare the public to know these packets are going to be massive. If we thought last year's packets were massive, these packets are likely to exceed those 500, 600, 700 page counts. What we're doing to help mitigate that is, again, having those one sheets available, having the information early. We're also preparing drafts really, really early. So starting next week, the public should have access to the Chapter 2 draft. You should have access at some point next week to the Chapter 21 and Chapter 22 draft. So you'll be able to see in black and white very early on the proposed revisions and respond. Same thing with staff reports. They're not, again, going to be due until September, but we're likely to have those ready to go in August so the public can have a lot of time to process. And that's one of the reasons, too, we've got sort of a quiet time in June and July when we've gone through this initial April and May of talking to the public, getting a lot of feedback, working on those drafts again. But we've given some quiet time to enable everybody to digest the changes, but we'll still be popping up on the website any updates, major updates that we know the public needs to be aware of. So I want to throw it out there again and stress these packets in September are going to be huge. So I recommend public, the Planning Commission, everybody, get plugged in early, get plugged in frequently, and make sure you're keeping up with the pace of readings, because as much as we'd love to present a 3-page packet, believe me, it'd be a lot less work. The requirements say that we have to show the revisions in entirety. We have to have a corresponding staff report, and that's what makes that page number go up. If the public has any other suggestions aside from the one sheet, aside from the other activities that we're doing, things that would be really helpful to facilitate the public processing this information, understanding this information, let us know. You can either use the Ask a Planner function on the website, or you can send us an email or a letter, or drop a comment in the kiosk if that's your preference. We'd really love to hear from you. And I just got up here again. We built an Ask a Planner function. We really want the public to use that. If it's a specific question about your specific property, we probably won't address that in the Ask a Planner session, and probably not in the FAQs, because that's personal. It's about your private property. But we definitely will pass that information on to our current planners who can evaluate that information and give you some feedback. Chair, that concludes my presentation. It looks like Isaac was not available to join us. So I can quickly shift gears to his presentation if that's okay, or we can pause for questions.
Does anyone have any questions at this point?
No
Hi,
questions.
yeah, this is Megan Wagenblast. And I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask or not about the agritourism part.
Could you hold your question till after planning commissioners have asked their questions, and then we'll come back to you?
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you. Planning commissioners, do you have any questions?
I do not, Lynn. Great presentation, and wow, it looks like a lot, very action-packed year. My gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good plan around how we will be able to interact with the public during the, with the constraints that we have. So I think that's great. I don't have any other questions. Thanks, Kelly.
Anyone else?
Kelly, this is
Planning commissioners, go ahead. Kate?
Yes, thank you, Chair McIntyre. I would when would you recommend, since all of this is coming up, and I'm understanding that August materials will be made available early. Does it make sense? It sounds like it makes sense to begin just talking to our communities or folks in our constituencies right now, making sure that they're aware. We can certainly do that in our neck of the woods. Doesn't sound like that's too early. Can you just kind of confirm?
No,
Okay.
I think earlier the better. The more people engage and the more frequently people engage, the better. So we're starting official outreach activities next week. We've got the virtual open house going live, and then we have the public presentation that we'd love folks to show up and ask questions at. So yeah, sooner the better. A lot of this information, like I said, it's phased. So chapter 2, chapter 21 is going up first. Then towards the end of the month, the beginning of May, we're going to have the legislative updates and the model code updates and the agritourism. And then further on at the end of May, we're going to have those overlay zones, the environmental protection districts. So they'll have to check back, but we want them to bookmark that Wasco County 2040 to engage and then ask lots and lots of questions, because that's really helpful for us. But the questions are also helpful for members of the public, and we can turn those questions, if we know what's on people's minds, what they're worried about, we can turn those things into FAQs. We can put them up on the Ask a Planner. So it's super helpful to us. And then, of course, I didn't make it part of my presentation, but I think it bears reminding planning commissioners that part of a post-acknowledgement plan amendment is the requirement to send that massive mailer to everybody in the county. We have to do it strategically with the rulemaking process because, it's a lot of work, but we're going to have likely a much more in-depth than a postcard, which is what we did for a lot of Wasco County 2040. We're going to have, a couple pages. We're also trying to come at it from a standpoint of making sure everybody has access to the information. So we may do some stuff in Spanish again, but that's going to be hitting in the beginning of August. So if you can drum up people's awareness before that notice comes out, because it's got that required really scary language for folks that says this may impact the uses of your property, may impact the value, and that's where people's blood pressure goes. So if we can kind of remind everybody what we're doing this year is most of it's mandatory, most of it's not. You're not going to see a big impact on your property, but you're going to see the scary notice. That would be super helpful, Kate.
Okay, great. Well, I'll make sure that we're trying to get the word out where we are. And if there's anything, I'll reach out to you separately to make sure if there's anything
Perfect.
particular that you really want to get out there, we'll get it out.
Perfect.
Any other commissioner comments or questions, suggestions? If not, Kelly.
So Yeah, I just wanted to really quickly, I'm not able to access Isaac's presentation, so I just really wanted to quickly, I'll give you the quick rundown. I believe it was Commissioner Willis had requested for this process that we make available some additional resources for planning commissioners in particular to reach those populations that you really feel you represent throughout the county. So we've created a folder on the Google Drive, which you all have access to because of your Gmail accounts through the county. And I will send out that link here probably this evening or tomorrow. And that's got all kinds of graphics that you can use on Facebook. So Kate, if you want to post up on South Wasco happenings, some of these like, hey, come to this meeting, or hey, we've already done the hard work of making the graphics for you. So you'll have that information. Isaac, as I mentioned, put together a really cool explainer videos. We're going to be sharing those out on the Wasco Planners Facebook page, but you're going to have access to those as well. So if you want to share those out, people are like, what's this chapter 2 stuff? You can share that explainer video, and it makes it kind of fun and interesting and quick. As we collect more resources like the one sheets and the other things that we think will be helpful for you to share, we're going to dump them in those folders. So that is a resource repository for planning commissioners to really feel empowered to talk to those communities that you represent throughout Wasco County and kind of share information. So we hope that's really helpful. We're happy to hear any suggestions for other things you'd like to see in those folders. The second thing, Kate, while again, your question about when do we start, one of the things I want to stress again is we're having this Ask a Planner event, I think on the 22nd it's scheduled for. It's going to be about an hour long, but we'd love to have a little opportunity. Planners love researching, probably more than most people. So we'd like to have some questions ahead of time so that we can do some research to make sure we get those answers, succinct and correct. So that's one thing, an action item that I think would be great for planning commissioners to really help us with is going out into the community. And even if you don't collect the questions, but you say, hey, planners want to know what you're worried about. What are the things you're thinking about? What are your concerns? And then encouraging them to use the Ask a Planner function. So it's just like a comment box, just like a contact box on a website. They can pop in there, send us a question any time of day. And we'll be able to use that for, again, to populate our FAQs, to populate those Ask Me Anything events, and also turn it into other types of collateral. Because I guarantee if Susie Joe out there has a question about one thing, then, Bill down the street may have the same question, because that's what we saw over Wasco County 2040. Is we saw people were worried about in the south of the county. There were still similar concerns up in Mosier. So we want to make sure we maximize that and share the wealth of information. So planning commissioners, please encourage all those questions, all that good information, and they can email, they can send us a letter, they can use the Ask a Planner function on the website. And that is it for me.
I do have a question.
Yeah, of course.
What's the Wasco County Planner Facebook page?
Yes, we have a Facebook page. It's not an official page. We're like a person. It was set up by Angie's predecessor, John Roberts. So we're on there like a person, not like a page. And some of that, the county's actually going through sort of an evaluation process to establish a county-wide Facebook presence. So in the meantime, we have this little person. We've got, I think, almost 300 friends. So amazingly enough, people actually want to be friends with us. And we did utilize it throughout Wasco County 2040 to really push out the message. We got lots of surveys, people directed towards the surveys that way, lots of shares and likes. So we have an active little population on there. We share information. One of the things we're going to be doing, we're really excited about in May is Wildfire Preparedness Month. So we're going to be doing a whole month long of posts and getting folks engaged to think about wildfire.
Well, there's a lot of goodness for sure in reaching Facebook users directly, but it does give us a warped view in that we're focusing our dialogue on people that use one particular for-profit application. So that is uncomfortable as a public entity. There, we're not going to get everyone, we're not going to get equal feedback because there's a significant skew in the population of Facebook users versus the general population. So, have to think about
We actually trialed other social media during Wasco County 2040. We have a Twitter account, we have a YouTube account, we have a Pinterest account. And Facebook was it's been the most successful. We still have those other accounts. We still have the ability to access users that way. We also have a newsletter that we send out just via email. So it's just, if it makes you feel more comfortable, it's just one method in our bigger toolbox of the ways we try to reach the public.
I'd feel more comfortable if we had a presence on the internet. All of those social media applications are private, and people may wish to join and participate, or they may not. But they're not neutral, and they're not universally used. So it's a slippery slope, I think, endorsing. Even if you use several of them, okay, I'm going to use Snapchat, I'm going to use Twitter, I'm going to use Facebook. So now I'm not endorsing one, but you're still skewing your dialogue. And newsletters are a one-way communication. We don't get a lot of inputs that way. We do communicate outwardly that way. So I don't know. I was just interested to learn more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Any other commissioner comments? Questions?
Chair, can I just respond to that briefly? I just want to make sure that it's clear that our website is rather robust for this. The 2040 website contains all of this information as a foundational centralized location to get all of it. And then it is pushed out through those social media platforms in hopes of engaging additional audiences beyond the neutral government-run website platform. So we do have a platform that is not social media, and it's all there. And there's lots of opportunity for folks to participate through that directly. That does not require a social media account.
Actually, where we divert everything on Facebook directly to the website. So we're not offering surveys or polls or anything on Facebook. We're diverting them directly to the website.
Yeah, okay,
Right.
great.
And
That helps
also does
clarify a
radio
lot.
shows for those who aren't online. I'm sorry.
Ted?
I'm sorry, I just said thanks for the clarification. That makes it a lot clearer. Thank you.
Did you have something else to say, Angie?
I think I talked over you, Commissioner Hargrave. I'm sorry. I think I said it, but in case it wasn't clear, we do radio shows as well. Callie does regular radio spots for people who might not be tracking the website or reading the content in any other way. And we do have a small radio presence where there's interest. And we have done some outreach to the local papers to try to solicit special articles. And like Kelly said earlier, if there's any suggestions as to different platforms that might exist that we're not currently pursuing, please let us know, because we're really trying hard to tap all available resources.
Yeah, that sounds extremely well-rounded to me now that you've fleshed that all out. Gosh, you go all the way from, are we talking AM radio here?
FM.
Oh, FM. Okay, so I was going to say, because
Gorge News Radio. Yeah.
If you go from the AM all the way to the social media, you have covered a very broad span. So
that's the
like
goal. That's the goal, is to hit everybody everywhere. And that, quite frankly, it's the same strategy we used for the comp plan, which I think was really successful. And it's why our numbers were as good as they were.
Super. Thanks.
Great. Okay, any further commissioner comments? If not, we'll move on to audience participation. Staff has compiled a list of those who have registered to comment, who Who has that list?
We didn't actually ask if people wanted to testify, so I think you could just open
Oh,
it up,
Okay.
Chair.
All right. Well, we'll open it first with Megan had the first question. Megan?
Thank you, commissioners. I appreciate you taking the time. And I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question for where we are in the process. And I apologize for our lag too. I live out.
Appears she's frozen up here. Is she frozen on everybody's screen?
Yes,
Okay.
lost audio.
Okay, well, perhaps we can come back to Megan. Or else she can perhaps submit a question in the chat. That would be also.
You can do that in the chat, or I can also follow up. I believe her
Okay,
registered with her email, so I can always follow
all
up.
right, thank you. Any other comments or questions from?
Oh, it looks,
Leon?
excuse me, it looks like Megan's back, and you might suggest, Megan, if you're having trouble with your bandwidth, you might turn off the video and then you won't use as much and just make your remark with the audio alone.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that. I don't know how far you got. I'm just wondering if what is on the table is that all EFUs will be open to having agritourism regardless of location.
It would be with the exception of a scenic area. So we're talking about non-scenic area lands, but yes.
So even in the districts where it's only volunteer firefighters?
I do not believe that there are, I think there may be some considerations for life safety issues within the statute. I don't know it off the top of my head. I apologize. I can certainly follow up with that. So there may be some considerations to evaluate during the permitting, but there aren't out of the gate restrictions on where we can permit those.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that for those of us who have lived through, well, most of us lived through the substation fire, and, you know, we've lost a very dear friend, that it's understood that it is absolutely not responsible to have any more people out here. I understand it's different in different areas, but Les Wasco County wants to start sharing their fire department out here. I'd just like to go on record that I'm opposed to it.
Okay, thank you for those comments and concerns, Megan. Those are, I'm sure Kelly will look into those aspects, and if we can incorporate the additional safety concerns, we certainly will. Anyone
Great.
else?
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Megan. Anyone else have a comment they wish to talk about? Questions? No one else? No burning issues? Okay, I forgot to get Megan's name and address. Megan, if
Oh,
you,
sorry. It's sure. It's Megan Wagenblast. Last name is spelled W-A-G-E, N as in Nancy, B as in boy, L-A-S-T. Can I give you my address offline? I understand we're on YouTube.
Yeah, that's fine. Megan, I'll reach out to you and get your email offline.
Oh, great. I think you have the email.
Okay, thank you.
From my registration. Thank you, commissioners.
Okay. Any further comments before we move on? Thank you, Kelly, for the great job. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. A lot of good challenges. Let us move on then to the director's report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kelly, for that great presentation and great discussion. I really appreciate everyone's full participation and attention to this. I'm really excited to kick this part of the work off. And like Kelly said, this is sort of the first year of necessary fixes. And I just want to flag that the packets will be humongous, but just it's a lesson learned for all of us. That's what it looks like when we go 9 years without legislative updates. And so our plan moving forward is to have annual updates to make sure that these packets aren't overwhelming for our public every single time and our commissioners, because it's painful at best. And we're doing everything we can to make it easy and transparent, but it's a lot of reading and a lot of material to work through. So long term, we hope to reduce that and keep it easy from here on out. So my list is admittedly a little bit lengthy today. I wanted to share that Planning Commissioner Leroy Booth has relocated out of Wasco County and as a result resigned from his post as Planning Commissioner. And so we'll be opening up recruitment this spring to fill that seat. Along the same vein, I'm really bummed to share with you all that Will Smith, our longtime senior planner, has also accepted a new opportunity in his life, and he will be leaving our staff at the end of the month. So we'll also be recruiting for a senior planner in the near future, and we're still working through some of that. It's rather new news to share, but I know a lot of you have worked with him for a long time, and he's done a lot of wonderful work for our community, including lots and lots of hazards planning work around wildfire in particular. So I'll be picking up some of that work. Kelly will be picking up some of that work, and of course, our current planners will be too. So it'll be a little bit of all hands on deck until we can get that position filled. It's a fairly critical position for our team. Senior planner wears a lot of hats. Scenic area ordinance updates are on the horizon. I think I may have given you a sneak peek of that at the previous meeting. We've officially received the Gorge Commission's transmittal in mid-March, and the Secretary of Agriculture has concurred with those documents. So we officially are on a 270-day clock, if you will, to incorporate those revisions into our local scenic area ordinance and get them adopted by mid-December, I believe is when that clock times out. To do that, I need to first go to the Board of County Commissioners and seek acknowledgement of our plans and sort of approval and for compliance with our Chapter 2 procedures chapter to pursue those changes. And we'll be rolling out a bit of a public involvement plan, very similar to what we're doing for Wasco County's comprehensive plan updates and incorporating those, but slightly different because the Gorge Commission has largely completed the public process. We only have so much latitude as we incorporate those into our local documents. So it'll be similar but different. And as we attempt to keep it all simple and transparent, I'll be very focused on keeping those sort of parallel ordinance updates on similar platforms, so it's easy for people to participate, but also so that folks don't get confused between the two plans because they will have some things in common. Kelly mentioned this earlier. There's quite a few legislative topics in motion at the moment. Several of them relate to some of the feedback we received at our roadshows and other public workshops for Wasco County 2040, in particular accessory dwelling units. We're watching those very closely, and there's a handful of others that will keep you apprised as they move forward. Our community wildfire protection planning process is in motion. Will Smith has done quite a bit of outreach and convening of the fire districts to get feedback from them as to what their current needs and concerns are. And we will begin sharing with you all the public participation plans and outreach tools that we plan to use along similar timelines with some of the dates that Kelly has shared. August, and some of the notifications will be similar. I've seen Kelly nod. The Measure 56 notice, the big mailer that we send out to everyone, will likely have some of that language in there to make sure people are seeing it all at once and not getting 10,000 things in the mail from us. To try to combine those wherever possible. I also want to let you know that I will be filing a letter of intent with FEMA to pursue some additional funds, hopefully receive those funds to pursue some natural hazards mitigation plan strategies with a specific emphasis on wildfire mitigation, wildfire risk mitigation, and floodplain administration. With the updates to our hazards maps in the last few years, we're becoming more aware of where some of these high-risk areas are. We've had a lot of feedback during these public meetings about wildfire risk and concerns about limited emergency response. And we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to address that as proactively as possible. So I just want to make sure you're not surprised if you see a board presentation or a packet that includes additional planning work, additional planning capacity to address those needs. I think it's timely. And now that we have data to support it, it's necessary moving forward. So heads up on that one. And then also I'll just tag on that there has been some progress made on the Bake Oven Solar Energy Farm. They've pursued a couple of their land use and compatibility statements, some sign-offs from our office and the Roadmaster and our emergency response folks. So they are making progress. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to give us a call. It was approved through the state's Energy Facility Siting Council, so it's their documents that govern how that energy facility is constructed, but they did a wonderful job incorporating our local ordinances and concerns voiced by the board and other partners in the conditions of approval. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And then, of course, there's all sorts of other stuff going on. So I'm available for follow-up on anything or questions now if you guys have any. It's been a busy time, a busy spring for us.
This is Commissioner Willis. I'm really sorry to hear about Will Smith. That will really be a loss, and Commissioner Booth. Both of them will really be missed. And thank you for all the updates. They seem, about ADUs, about wildfire mitigation, about all that stuff. It just seems very relevant. We're all ears down here in South County because all of those things are going to be very relevant for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Any other questions or comments for Director? Okay. If not, I guess we get to adjourn if we have a motion.
I make a motion
To adjourn,
to adjourn.
Commissioner Channel.
Second.
Those in favor? Say aye.
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 I.